Hello, my friend. Thank you for coming back and sitting with me for a little while today. There are people who come into our lives quietly. They may not appear in our fun photographs. They may not be there on holidays. They may not be related to us at all. But somehow, they leave something in us that stays. A sentence said at just the right time. A hand placed gently on a shoulder. A little bit of belief when we did not yet know how to believe in ourselves. A kindness they may have forgotten years ago, but we remember for the rest of our lives. And sometimes, as life carries us forward, as we get older, busier, and more responsible, we tell ourselves that one day we will go bow and say, "Thank you." But that day keeps moving farther away, not because we are ungrateful, but because we think there will still be time. Today, I want to tell you about a man named Robert. Robert was in his early 50s. He had a family, a steady job, a life many people would call peaceful. But one afternoon, while cleaning out his old home office, Robert found something that made him sit down and stay quiet for a long time. A small card, a little yellowed around the edges, and inside it was the name of someone he had not thought about in many years. Robert grew up in a small town in Ohio. It was not a wealthy place, and it was not the kind of place where everyone expected to go far. It was the kind of town where people knew each other's names. Familiar roads, a little diner on the corner, a red brick high school, an old football field behind the gym, and winters so long that, some years, it felt as if spring had forgotten the way back. Robert's father worked in a machine shop. His mother worked part-time at a grocery store. The family had enough, but not much more than enough. Robert was a quiet boy, not because he had nothing to say, but because he had learned early that sometimes it was easier not to add more trouble to anyone's day. At school, Robert was not one of the students people noticed right away. He was not especially good at sports. He was not in the band. He was not the kind of kid teachers remembered during the first week of class. He usually sat near the window, did enough work to pass, answered when he was called on, then went home quietly. No one expected Robert to do anything remarkable, not even Robert. In his junior year of high school, Robert had an English teacher named Eleanor Whitman. Everyone called her Mrs. Whitman. She was almost 60. Short gray hair, thin-framed glasses, simple sweaters. On her desk there was always a cold cup of tea, a stack of papers to grade, and a few books with worn corners. Mrs. Whitman was not the kind of teacher who spoke loudly. She did not try to make the whole class laugh. She did not give grand speeches about chasing dreams. But when she looked at a student, it felt as if she truly saw them. Not just their grades, not just their test scores, but the person underneath. Someone growing up, someone trying, someone still figuring out who they were. Robert did not understand that at first. To him, English class was just another class he had to get through. He read because reading was assigned. He wrote because papers were due. And he tried not to draw too much attention to himself. One day, Mrs. Whitman asked the class to write a short essay. The topic was, "A place where you feel safe." Robert did not know what to write. He stared at the blank page for a long time. Other students began writing right away. Some wrote about their grandparents' house. Some wrote about the football field. Some wrote about church. Robert just sat there, holding his pencil, tapping it lightly against the edge of his desk. Finally, he wrote about the garage behind his house, the place where his father worked on cars in the evening. He wrote about the smell of motor oil, the old radio playing country songs, the single yellow light hanging from the ceiling. He wrote about how sometimes, when his father was too tired to talk, the two of them would simply sit there together in silence, his father wiping his hands on an old rag, Robert sitting on a wooden crate. Not much being said, But Robert felt safe there, because in that little garage, he did not have to prove anything. He only had to be there. He turned in the essay, then forgot about it. A few days later, when Mrs. Whitman handed the papers back, Robert saw a sentence written at the bottom of the last page in blue ink. It was not long, just this: Robert, you notice things other people miss. Keep writing. Robert read those words several times. He looked around the room. No one else had noticed. No one knew that a small sentence at the bottom of a school paper had just shifted something into him. But for Robert, it was the first time an adult had told him there might be something in him worth continuing. Not an award, not applause, just one sentence. You notice things other people miss. Keep writing. After that day, Robert began to pay more attention in English class. He did not suddenly become talkative. He still sat near the window. He still rarely raised his hand. But he started reading more carefully, writing more slowly. Sometimes after class, Mrs. Whitman would place a book on his desk and say, "You might like this one." Robert did not always like them. Some books he read for 10 pages and put down. Some he did not understand at all. But there was one book about a young man leaving a small town to find a life of his own. That one stayed with him. Robert read it over 3 nights, under the small lamp beside his bed. He did not tell anyone. But for the first time, he wondered whether his life might be wider than the road from home to school, from school to the machine shop, and from the machine shop back home again. One winter afternoon, Mrs. Whitman asked Robert to stay after class. The room was empty. Outside the window, snow was falling lightly. The desk stood in quiet rows. A few lines from the poem they had discussed were still written on the chalkboard. Robert stood in front of her desk with his hands in his coat pockets. He thought he must have done something wrong. Mrs. Whitman opened a folder. Inside were some of Robert's essays. She looked up and asked, "Have you ever thought about applying to college?" Robert laughed softly, not because the question was funny, but because it felt so far away that he did not know how else to respond. "Probably not." "Why not?" Robert shrugged. "My family doesn't have money for that, and I don't think I'm really the kind of person who goes to college." Mrs. Whitman looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Sometimes we don't know what kind of person we are until someone opens a door for us." Robert said nothing. She pulled out a few papers. Scholarship information, a list of schools in the state, an application form. She had already prepared them. "You do not have to decide today," she said. "But you should know there are other roads, and you have the right to look down them." Robert took the papers home. That evening, he placed them on the kitchen table. His father looked them over. He did not say anything for a few seconds. Then he asked, "You want to go to college?" Robert looked down. "I don't know." His father nodded. He was not a man who knew how to show emotion easily. He only said, "If you want to try, then try." Robert's mother dried her hands on her apron. She looked at the papers for a long time. Then she said, "We'll figure it out." Robert remembered that. Not because everything suddenly became easy. It did not. But because for the first time, a door seemed to have opened a little, and a few people were standing beside him, not pushing him through, but not leaving him outside alone either. The months that followed were not simple. Robert worked after school at the grocery store. He filled out forms, wrote essays, asked for recommendation letters. Some nights, he wanted to quit. Some of the forms made him feel as if he did not belong in that world. Questions about achievements, activities, future goals. Robert did not know what to write. He only knew that he was a boy from a small town, someone without anything especially impressive to show. But Mrs. Whitman would not let him make himself smaller than he was. She read every draft. She underlined the honest sentence. She crossed out the lines he had written only because he thought they sounded like what people wanted to hear. Once she told him, "Don't try to write like someone else, Robert. Write like yourself. That is the part worth reading." That sentence followed Robert longer than she could have known. In the end, Robert was accepted into a small college in the state. It was not famous, it was not grand, but for his family, it was a very big thing. The day the letter arrived, Robert brought it to class, not to show off, only because he felt Mrs. Whitman should know. She read it, smiled, then said, "I knew you could." Not, "I'm surprised." Not, "You proved everyone wrong." Just, "I knew you could." As if she had seen it before Robert could see it for himself. At the end of the school year, just before graduation, Mrs. Whitman gave Robert a small card. On the front was a road winding through autumn trees. Inside she had written, "Robert, wherever life takes you, keep noticing the quiet things. They will help you remember who you are." Robert read it, then thanked her, quickly, awkwardly, the way a 17-year-old boy thanks someone when he does not yet understand the size of what he has been given. "Thank you for everything." Mrs. Whitman smiled. "Take care of yourself, Robert." He slipped the card into a book, and then life began moving very quickly. College was not easy for Robert. During the first few weeks, he felt as if he had entered a place where everyone knew the rules except him. His roommate used words he had never heard. Classmates talked about summer trips, advanced courses, and families where college had always been expected. Robert studied, worked part-time in the library, and tried not to let anyone know how afraid he was. Some nights, he wanted to call home and say he could not do it. But then he remembered Mrs. Whitman's words, "Write like yourself." So he did. In his freshman writing class, he wrote an essay about his town, about the machine shop, about his mother standing behind the grocery counter, about men coming home from work with oil on their sleeves, about a quiet kind of dignity he had never known how to name. His professor read part of the essay aloud to the class. He did not say Robert's name. He only said it had an honest voice. Robert sat in the back of the room, looked down at his desk, and thought of Mrs. Whitman. He meant to write to her. Many times. He even bought a postcard from the campus bookstore. He kept it in a drawer. But then there were assignments, extra shifts, exams, summer jobs, new relationships. Life kept opening. And the letter was never sent. Not because Robert had forgotten, but because he kept thinking, "One day, I'll write a proper letter. One day, I'll stop by the old school. One day, I'll tell her how much she changed my life." One day. Years passed. Robert graduated, got his first job, then his second. He got married, had 2 children, bought a small house, paid bills, replaced the roof, stayed up with sick kids, went to work, came home, lived a life full of ordinary things. Every now and then, when one of his children said they were not good at something, Robert would hear Mrs. Whitman's voice in his memory. Sometimes we don't know what kind of person we are until someone opens a door for us, and he would try to do that for them. Not push, not force. Just open a small door, then stand nearby. Sometimes at work, Robert had to write a speech, or an important letter, or a note of sympathy to a colleague. He always began by sitting quietly for a moment and asking himself, "What is the truest thing here?" He did not always think about where he had learned that, but maybe he knew. Life was busy, and some gratitude stays quietly inside us, like a letter we never mailed. Then one day, when Robert was 53, he cleaned out his home office. His children were grown. The house was quieter than it had once been. His wife told him it was time to get rid of some old box ices in the closet. Robert opened them one by one. Old bills, notebooks, family photographs, a few books from college. Then, from the middle of an old novel, a card slipped out and fell to the floor. Robert bent down and picked it up. The edges were yellowed. On the front was a road winding through autumn trees. For a moment, he did not even need to open it. He remembered. Mrs. Whitman. He sat down at his desk, opened the card. The blue ink was still there. Robert, wherever life takes you, keep noticing the quiet things. They will help you remember who you are. Robert read the sentence. Once, then again. The room became very still. He had not expected to feel so much. But some memories do not disappear. They simply sit quietly somewhere inside us, waiting for the day we finally call them by name. Robert looked around his office. The books on the shelves. The photographs of his children. The desk where he had written so many letters, speeches, notes, and messages. And he suddenly understood that Mrs. Whitman had not only helped him get into college, she had helped him see himself differently, more kindly, more widely, with more hope. Robert placed the card on the desk, then did the thing he had meant to do for more than 30 years. He began looking for her. Finding someone after so many decades is not always easy. Robert called his old high school. The person in the office did not know much. Mrs. Whitman had retired long ago. Another retired teacher gave him the number of a former teachers' association in town. From there, he found the address of Mrs. Whitman's daughter. And finally, after several phone calls, Robert learned that Mrs. Whitman was still alive. She was 87 years old. She lived with her daughter in a small house outside Columbus. Her health was not what it used to be. Her memory came and went. But she still loved being read to. Robert sat at his desk for a long time after he hung up the phone. In front of him was the old card. He could send flowers. He could send a short note. He could ask her daughter to pass along a message. But after 35 years, Robert felt that a thank you should be spoken in his own voice. That weekend, Robert drove more than 2 hours to Columbus. It was late fall. The trees along the road were gold and brown. He carried the old card in the inside pocket of his jacket. As he drove, he thought about many things. The 17-year-old boy, who had once stood in front of a teacher's desk, not believing he could go very far. The gray-haired woman who had seen something in him anyway. All the times he had meant to write. All the times he had thought. Later, and he felt grateful that, this time, later still had time to become today. Mrs. Whitman's daughter lived on a quiet street. There were small trees in the front yard. A wind chime hanging near the porch. Her daughter opened the door. She was a woman in her 50s, with eyes that looked very much like her mother's. "You're Robert?" Robert nodded. "Yes. Thank you for letting me come." She smiled. "My mother is in the living room. She's having a pretty clear day." Robert stepped inside. The house smelled like hot tea and old books. Mrs. Whitman was sitting in a chair by the window, with a blanket over her legs. She looked smaller than Robert remembered. Her hair was whiter, her face more lined, her hands thinner. But when she looked up, there was something familiar in her eyes. Her daughter leaned down and said gently, "Mom, one of your former students is here to see you. His name is Robert." Mrs. Whitman looked at him. For a moment, Robert did not know whether she remembered him. He stepped closer. "Hello, Mrs. Whitman. I'm Robert Hayes. I was in your English class in 1987. She looked at him a little longer. Then a small smile appeared. "Robert," she said slowly, "the quiet boy by the window." Robert laughed, and unexpectedly felt his throat tighten. "Yes," he said, "that was me." Her daughter brought over another chair. Robert sat across from his old teacher. For the first few minutes, they talked about simple things. The old town, the school, A few teachers they both remembered. Mrs. Whitman spoke slowly. Sometimes she paused to find a word. Sometimes her daughter helped her remember a name. Robert did not rush her. He only sat there, the way she had once sat with his awkward essays, patiently, without pushing. After a while, Robert took the old card from his jacket pocket. "I still have this." Mrs. Whitman looked at it. Robert opened it and handed it to her. She held it with both hands. Read her own handwriting, very slowly. A small smile came across her face. "I wrote that." Robert nodded. "Yes." She looked at him. Did it help? The question was so gentle, almost ordinary, as if she did not know how large the answer could be. Robert looked at the card, then at his old teacher. He had imagined this moment many times during the drive. He thought he would say something beautiful, something well arranged. But in the end, what came out was very simple. "Yes," he said. He paused. "You helped me believe my life could be wider than what I saw at the time." Mrs. Whitman was quiet. Robert continued. "I don't know if you remember, but you gave me scholarship papers. You read my essays. You told me not to write like someone else." He smiled. "I carried that with me my whole life." Mrs. Whitman looked at him. Her eyes grew wet. Robert looked down at his hands. "I meant to thank you so many times. So many times. But I kept thinking there would be another chance." He took a breath. "I'm sorry it took me so long." She placed the card on her lap, then reached out her hand. Robert took it. Her hand was small and cold, but it was still the hand that had once written blue ink in the margins of a boy's paper. Mrs. Whitman said, "Robert, teachers don't always get to know what stayed." She squeezed his hand very lightly. "Thank you for coming back to tell me." Nothing grand happened after that. No speech, no loud tears. Just an old student, an aging teacher, a yellowed card, and a thank you that had finally found its way home. On the drive back, Robert did not turn on the radio. He let the car move through the autumn roads in silence. The old card was still in his jacket pocket, but this time it no longer felt like a reminder of something he had failed to say. It felt like a door that had been gently closed. Not closed to forget, closed to keep safe. When he arrived home, it was dark. His wife was reading in the living room. She looked up and asked, "How was the trip?" Robert sat down beside her. He thought for a moment, then said, "I think there are some people in your life you don't realize were important until much later." His wife nodded. "Did she remember you?" Robert smiled. "She called me the quiet boy by the window." His wife laughed. "That sounds like you." Robert laughed too. That night, before going to bed, he opened the drawer of his desk. He placed the old card inside a new envelope. On the front he wrote, "Mrs. Whitman." Then he put it in the top drawer, not to hide it away as something old, but so that once in a while, when he opened the drawer, he would remember that a life is not shaped only by big decisions. Sometimes it is held up by the people who saw us at the exact moment we needed to be seen. A few weeks later, Robert received a letter from Mrs. Whitman's daughter. Inside was a handwritten note. She wrote that her mother had passed away peacefully on a Sunday morning. She had not been in pain. She had not been afraid. And in her final days, she had mentioned a former student who had come to visit. "The man who kept my card all those years," she had said. Mrs. Whitman's daughter wrote, "I don't know exactly what you said to my mother that day, but after you left, she seemed lighter. She said, 'Sometimes a teacher gets to know. Sometimes a teacher gets to know.'" Robert read the letter several times, then placed it beside the old card. He did not feel pain in the way he had feared. Of course, he was sad. But underneath the sadness was a strange peace, because the thank you was no longer trapped inside him. It had been spoken. It had been heard. It had been received. And maybe in Mrs. Whitman's final days, it had become a small gift returned to her. A reminder that the years she spent standing in classrooms, reading awkward essays, writing blue ink in the margins, had not disappeared into nothing. You know, I think most of us have someone like Mrs. Whitman somewhere in our lives. Maybe it was a teacher, a neighbor, an old manager, a family friend, someone who said something they may not even remember saying. But we remember. Someone who saw something good in us before we were able to see it ourselves. And maybe the beautiful thing about Robert's story is not that he became successful. It is that he finally went back and said thank you. Not a perfect thank you, not a grand speech, just one person standing in front of another and saying, "What you did stayed with me." I think there is a lot of gratitude in this life that remains very quiet. Not because we do not feel it, but because we assume the other person already knows, or because we think there will be another time, another visit, another letter, another day. But sometimes, speaking a thank you does not only help the person who hears it, it also helps us set down something we have carried for a very long time. If today's story made you think of someone who was kind to you, someone who believed in you, someone who opened a small door when you needed one, I hope you hold that feeling gently, not as regret, but as a gift. Maybe that person is still in your life. Maybe it has been many years since you last saw them. Maybe all it takes is a message, a letter, a short phone call. Or maybe for tonight, it is simply a quiet moment inside your own heart where you say, Thank you. Thank you for sitting with me today. I truly appreciate it. Until our next story, take good care of yourself. And if there is a thank you still waiting somewhere inside you, maybe it does not have to be perfect. Maybe it only has to be honest. This is Companion. Stories that remind us what truly matters.